43 seconds in. 43 seconds late. Oh dear. Disastrous. Good morning, everyone. I hope we're all feeling good after those carbon neutral beers. I am. I did my part when it comes to carbon capture storage last night. It was very, very good. Welcome to the final day of the Better Futures Forum. It's been a real pleasure co-emceeing this with Dan Borscher. Really wonderful. And we are, of course, here, day 2, ready to ask and fight and dream about brand new support for ramping up climate ambition and climate change, because the opportunities are real. And we're here to work with the new government to make sure Australia is a global leader in renewable energy, but also climate justice. It was great to see Chris Bowen at breakfast this morning, and it was great to see those platitudes gently pushed back by Kelly and the gang this morning. That was wonderful too. I'm investigative humorist and celebrity chef Dan Illich, and it's been my pleasure to be part of this forum with you.
And Dan, it's great to be with you as well. I'm Dan Borscher from the ABC and thrilled to be here co-facilitating. I just want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land. We are meeting here on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country in Canberra, and I welcome you online wherever you're joining us from around the nation on whoever's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lands you're on. And if you want to weigh in, pop into the comments in the chat feature, either the lands that you're coming from or perhaps your connections. And for me, it's growing up on the lands of the Warramungu people in Tennant Creek, while acknowledging my mum's own ancestry from the Kulin Nation of Victoria and those lands down there around Warrnambool. And I want to pay particular tribute to the incredible First Nations people that we've already heard from across the first day and into today, and that welcome that we heard from Aunty Matilda Halson-Ngambri Elder yesterday, really calling for purpose, respect and a drive and a vision going forward. And that's certainly what I heard across the rest of yesterday, and looking at the program, what I'm expecting to hear as part of the conversations today as well. I also want to acknowledge some of the other incredible, tremendous Indigenous voices we heard. Uncle Reverend Ray Minicon, Kathy Etok, Dr. Janine Muhammad, Amy Meehan, Dr. Virginia Marshall and Karrina Nolan. We also had the incredible performances from Nadala Barker yesterday, and her strong call to action for all of us to, well, I think in paraphrasing, she was saying, don't just focus on the economy. What about the human aspect of climate change and of all of these challenges that we're facing? And I want to acknowledge some of the other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders who are here with us today. Aunty Polly Cutmore, I got to have a bit of a yarn with you this morning and hear about some of the fight and the challenge that you're undertaking. Kate Kelleher, Rosemary Smith, Shiley Fairman, Associate Professor Veronica Matthews, Joanne Griffin and Valmay Smith. And I just want to welcome and acknowledge those incredible leaders, some of whom are younger leaders who are really taking these challenges forward. And certainly I was heartened yesterday to hear so much discussion, and even from the Minister this morning, about the way to embed First Nations voices and perspectives into all of these conversations. And I suspect it ties in quite neatly with the big national conversation we're having right now about a voice as well.
Just a little few housekeeping notes for folks online for the best experience today. Read through the help desk located in the tabs on the left-hand side of your screen in the virtual lobby. If you need to contact the wonderful events team here or tech support, navigate to the inbox at the top of your screen and search event support for instant chat. They're pretty good. There's somebody there all the time. So, you know, if you're worried, jump in the chat, someone will be with you straight away. There'll be sections of the program where the events team will push you into different virtual rooms, and there'll be times where you'll be asked to click through to a breakout room via the virtual lobby. If in doubt, just navigate back to the virtual lobby and simply click into the next section. And with so many people all over Australia joining us today online, it's important we run on time. I actually saw my lawyer in the online chat. I was like, oh, hello, it's good to see them here. That's fantastic. Reply to my emails if you are my lawyer. Thank you very much. So please ensure to make sure you come back from breaks on time and pay attention throughout the day for the notifications, so we can, keep it pacey.
Contract lawyer, I hope, not your defamation lawyer. I'm a bit nervous. For those of us that are joining us in the room, the toilets are out the back of the lobby and down the corridor to your right as you exit this auditorium. Keep in mind that there's another event happening here with us today, so we'll all be sharing those amenities. Emergency exits are located to my left, which will be your right, and out to the foyer, and you'll be given instructions there in the event of an emergency. Catering is provided throughout the day, but we ask that you don't bring any food or drink other than water bottles into this auditorium. And it might be a good opportunity now, if you've got a mobile phone, just to flick it to silent in the event that it goes off. You don't want everyone to stop and be looking at you while that phone's ringing.
Yeah. Let's pay special attention and thank our forum partners for today who've made this event possible. UNSW Canberra and Hester Super, thank you so much. Sponsors like you guys absolutely make events happen. Yesterday we had the opportunities to hear stories highlighting some of the ambitious climate action underway across Australia and the steps we need to future-proof an ambitious national climate agenda. To capture our discussions from yesterday and today, we'll be joined by digital scribe Josie this afternoon to reflect on our discussions through illustrations. So they will be published throughout the day, so feel free to jump in and share those when you can. We have another jam-packed day today with a focus on strengthening climate ambition. And to those of you who couldn't join us at breakfast this morning, the conversations are well underway. I'm so looking forward to the panel discussions to unpack all about renewable export opportunities for Australia. But first, let's revisit the Minister's statement for those who missed it to set the context for the panellists' conversation. This is for folks at home.
Well, thanks very much, Dermot, and I also want to acknowledge the fact that this is Ngunnawal and Ngambri land. The camo's asking me to get behind the lectern. There you go. I also want to acknowledge the fact that this is Ngunnawal and Ngambri land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I was very pleased that State and Territory Energy Ministers agreed a few weeks ago, unanimously, to co-design with our First Nations people a First Nations clean energy strategy. Because First Nations people, of course, are at the front line of battling the impacts of climate change right around the country. There is no disadvantage that isn't made worse by climate change. But of course, First Nations people need to be and will be very much at the centre of the solutions as well. Well, friends, I really have three quick messages for you this morning. Firstly, together, we've done a fair bit in the last 110 days. The government's done a lot, but we haven't done it alone. We've done it working together. Tonight or tomorrow, the Parliament will pass the Climate Change Bill. It'll become the Climate Change Act in the next 24 hours. It's been a long time between drinks for sensible, progressive climate legislation in our country. But it's just the beginning. We've got a lot more to do. But we've done it together. People across the Parliament passing it through the House of Representatives, 89 votes to 55. The margin won't be that big in the Senate. Already shall be. Working together on sensible ideas and people going with what can be done in a workable Parliament to get the job done. And it's not just about the climate legislation, of course, because a target is easier said than that. We're getting on with the job. There's offshore wind zones, declaring the first zones, beginning the process of consultation on the second, third and fourth zones and fifth zone, an area which is so jobs-rich and energy-rich in regions which are in such need of economic investment as they undertake such major economic change. Whether it's beginning the conversation about how we decarbonise our transport sector. We will pass our electric vehicle tax cut through the House of Representatives this fortnight. I'm confident that'll pass the Senate as well. We've begun the conversation about how we require car manufacturers to actually send fuel-efficient, zero-emissions cars to Australia. Part of the issue is still increasing demand, sure, but more and more the issue is supply. As we know, when a new electric vehicle comes on sale in Australia, you better be quick, because they sell out in the first 30 seconds. We're not getting enough supply. Australia is the only country in the OECD not to require car manufacturers to send fuel-efficient, zero-emissions vehicles to our country. That has an impact. Only Australia and Russia in the developed world have no obligations on car manufacturers. That has an impact. We're having that conversation about how we fix that. Getting on with the job. And I was very pleased that clean energy was such a big factor in last week's successful Jobs and Skills Summit. Well, I was representing us at the G20 Climate and Energy Ministers. John Grimes and Kane Thornton and others were doing such a good job representing you at the Jobs and Skills Summit, because clean energy is, as we all know, the centre of a successful economy. So that's the first message. We've done a fair bit. My second message is, though, we've got a lot more to do. This is just the beginning, just the framework. Now, some of you have heard me say before, there's only 88 months to 2030. I'm here to tell you it's now September. There's 87 months to 2030. The clock is ticking. We don't have a minute to waste. 43% emissions reduction in 8 years is actually a big ask. I want it to be a floor. I want us to do better. We'll get emissions down as low as possible. But actually, reducing emissions over that time frame is actually lightning speed when you consider how late our country is starting on this journey. Our daughter Grace is doing the HSC at the moment. She starts university next year. It seems like yesterday we were dropping her off at kindergarten. That was 12 years ago. And yet we've got a lot less than that to reduce emissions by 43% and get it done, and it's not going to happen unless we build 10,000 kilometres of transmission lines across our country. It's not going to happen unless we get our biggest emitters reducing their emissions, our 215 biggest emitters reducing emissions under the safeguards mechanism. It's not going to happen unless we decarbonise our transport system. It's not going to happen unless the government itself gets to net zero by 2030. All these things have to happen and more. So we've got a lot to do. And again, I want to do it together, with you, with industry, across the board. And my final and third message is this. The dividend for our country is enormous. Some people say, well, you know, we should be doing this, other countries should. No, that's nonsense. You know, and I know that we're the 14th biggest emitter in absolute terms. To argue that we shouldn't do anything because there's countries bigger than us is to argue that, well, the 13 countries should do something but us and 190 countries below us shouldn't bother. You know that's a fallacious argument. You know it's a moral obligation to the rest of the world and future generations. All that is true. But even if it wasn't true, even if no other country was doing nothing, it is in our nation's interest to become a clean energy superpower. It is good for our country, good for our economy, good for our national security. It is good for us. It's in our national interest. For too long, Australians have been told, 10 years and longer, Australians were told, action on climate change might be all morally virtuous, but it comes at a cost to you and your job. It is a lie. It's always been a lie, and it's never been more a lie than today. And the dividend for our country is enormous. As you know, with your Sunshot project, as so many reports, as so many analyses, as common sense tells us, with more sunlight hitting our landmass than any other country in the world, with above average wind, we have enormous opportunities to do all that and more. Choose your superlative. Renewable energy superpower, renewable energy powerhouse, the Saudi Arabia of renewable energy, whatever it is, whatever your preferred superlative is, it's all accurate and true and potential. But again, as I said before, not unless we get on with it. Build the transmission, build the storage. We can build renewable energy, we know how to do that. We've got to know how to store it as well. You've heard me say before, sure, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. That is a fact. Congratulations to the deniers and the delayers for working that out. Rain doesn't always fall either, and we store water, and we drink that water every day. It can be done with storage, and it will be done with storage. But this is the key. Build the renewables, build the storage, build the transmission, and then build it more so we can export it to the world. These are the opportunities for us. And I'll finish with this point, and I've mentioned it once or twice. We do it together. And the Albanese government, we've got passion, we've got energy, we've got urgency, and we've got ideas. But we don't have all the ideas. We don't have all the wisdom. Don't know it all. We'll work across the parliament in good faith. We'll work across the sector in good faith. We'll work with you in good faith. All ideas are gratefully received. So, many will be able to work with, some might be difficult, but we'll always work it through and talk it through together and work out what can be done. This is the opportunity facing our country. I can't wait to do more with you. It has to be done. We've wasted a decade. We're not wasting a second now, and nor do we have a second to waste. So let's get on with it. Thank you for your time this morning.
to hear that again, you know, after 10 years of doing nothing. All of a sudden, the sprint is on. Let's do it. All right, we're going to move into our first panel of the day where we explore further opportunities to turn Australia into a renewable energy exporter. And it's my pleasure to bring Emma Herd up here. Emma is a prominent Australian and international, is very prominent in the Australian and international climate arena. She is an EY Oceania Climate Change and Sustainability Partner with over 20 years experience in climate change and sustainability practice. Thanks, Emma.
It gives me a great pleasure to join you this morning, and I also just want to start by paying my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we're hosting this event, and also to the traditional owners of the lands from which you are all joining us virtually as well. So I have the pleasure and the privilege of moderating the first panel session of today with a, dare I say it, cracking lineup of speakers, and a really chock-full agenda of issues, topics, comments and perspectives that we also have the opportunity to work our way through. So it sort of feels a bit superfluous, but I'm going to introduce the panel anyway. So let me start with Dermot O'Gorman, who's the CEO of WWF Australia, Michele O'Neill, who's the president of the ACTU, Kelly O'Shannessy, who's the CEO of the Australian Conservation Foundation, Karrina Nolan, and also Clark Butler, who are also here representing the First Nations perspective, but also the opportunities perspective as well, which is so fantastic in terms of the discussion that we're about to have as well. So please join me in welcoming the panel. And let's get straight into it. We just heard the Minister's comments, big points that he wanted to make. 3 big points which were, dare I say it, actually about 25 points compartmentalised into 3. But I want to, I guess, work my way through the panel in terms of asking you your thoughts and reflections on the Minister's comments and his vision for Australia as a renewable energy superpower, and how that feeds in with your vision of Australia as a renewable energy superpower. And I'm actually going to start at the panel, defying expectations. And I want to start with you, Clark, in terms of what you thought and felt, or where you see things are when you hear the Minister's comments around the opportunity set for Australia.
Thanks very much, Emma. My day job at the moment is developing a green steel plant in Townsville. We're very excited about that, and the first thing the Minister said is they've done a lot of work, good work so far already. From our point of view, the most important thing is to be able to attract investment to projects like this, and policy certainty, and getting the government on the right side of the debate rather than the wrong side is an incredible advantage. So really, if he does nothing more than that, we're already a step well ahead. I have a slightly contrarian view on his renewable energy superpower. I'm not a fan of exporting energy unless it's embedded in value-added product. I think we have a great opportunity to redesign our economy and really ramp up exports of value-added products. And I'll put my hand up for steel, but other things as well. To me, that's where the focus should be, not on exporting electricity or green hydrogen at this stage. That's fine, but we don't want to be the nation's, the world's energy miner in the next decade.
Yeah, great. Karrina, I'm keen to hear your perspective in terms of original power, but also in terms of some of the comments that you made earlier this morning around the opportunity to co-design the future of the energy system as well. Keen to hear your thoughts and reflections as well.
Thanks. First, I'd also just like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Ngunnawal mob that we meet in this country, and also shout out to Uncle Ray and Auntie Polly, you know, for their strong leadership to protect country. And I think just before I get into, you know, what a First Nations clean energy strategy could look like, in order for us to transition, we actually also need to acknowledge that our communities are still on the front line of new fossil fuel projects, you know, contributing to climate change, but also contributing to the destruction of our country. And I know that Aunty Polly is still fighting that fight against gas companies, and a lot of the work we support people to do in the Beetaloo in the Northern Territory is also to stop those new fossil fuel projects going ahead. So, you know, it's all in context, and actually our communities are still dealing with those issues at the same time as actually looking for, you know, alternative economic development opportunities, which is where we're really starting to work with our communities about, well, what does large-scale projects look like, what does export projects look like. And we've done a lot of work actually with the traditional owners in the Northern Territory around Sun Cable, and one of the things that was really clear to us very early on is this is communities living with extreme energy security, can't keep the lights on, can't keep medicines cool, you know, they're disconnected every couple of weeks from the grid, you know, they're not a part of the national energy market, so we're looking at that. And then at the other hand, there's this big project proposed which is going to send power to Singapore, and our own communities don't have that power. So we need to make sure that we're doing both the things that ensure the large-scale projects are benefiting our communities if we choose and consent to having them, but at the same time we're dealing with some of that energy security. So, you know, there's a lot of complexities, I think, facing our communities for a really large-scale transition will look like, large footprint, lots to talk about around transmission, etc. But yeah, there's a lot to do.
Yeah, great. And also just really interesting to hear those common themes emerging of renewable energy superpower for who, and as agreed by who as well, and the really strong need to make sure that we're meeting all of the needs of all of the communities in terms of thinking through the growth of the industry. Kelly, I want to turn to you at this point in terms of the opportunities, but also response to the Minister's comments on where we're at, what we've done, what we need to do, the dividend.
Thank you, and it's wonderful to be here, and hello everyone and online, and it's an honour to be here on Ngambri and Ngunnawal country today. So it's really exciting that we're talking about the opportunities, and climate change is spoken about in the context of opportunity, not cost, which, you know, in the last election in 2019, that wasn't the case. And everyone in this room has worked very hard to shift that. And I think the Minister has been a leader in that. I agree with Clark that there's so much opportunity in this country to manufacture clean, renewable powered steel and aluminium and make batteries and solar panels. And I think we need to do that for sovereignty anyway, looking at how much of the world's solar panels are made in one nation in the world, which is China, and that's moving to 95% in 5 years. And I just don't think one big solution to climate change should be made in one country. So we've got this enormous opportunity for manufacturing, for a services sector. I do think exporting energy, clean energy, is also important because there are countries that don't have ability to create their own energy, and they'll be looking to us. I was really excited to hear the Minister talk about 200, 300, 400% renewable energy, because we do need to produce a lot to power renewable steel and aluminium and to create those batteries. And so we need to be thinking about scale, and that needs to be done fairly and fast, so we do need fair transitions and authorities to oversee that. The other thing I think that we need to talk about in this country is what we move away from. So our coal and gas that we export to the world is fueling global warming. We are in the top 3 nations in the world in terms of carbon intensive exports. Australia matters to climate change in the world. And we really matter to climate solutions to fix it, because we could help the world solve climate change through what we export. But you actually can't have both. You can't keep exporting coal and gas and moving to the clean future. You have to transition. And I just wanted to say, I don't hear that yet. And of course, we're seeing governments still opening up new exploration sites and providing public money into coal and gas, which we need to stop and put public money into clean. But I was at the Jobs Summit with Michele last week, and I did not hear one mention of coal and gas. And to be honest, I didn't even have to talk about the clean energy and export opportunities, because the Premier of WA, Northern Territory, the Prime Minister, Twiggy Forrest, everyone else did that. And they weren't talking about coal and gas, which means in that room it's not a safe space any longer to defend old industries What was talked about was fair and just transition and care for communities, which is very important in workers. But the story is changing, and we just need to change that. And I just wanted to share that with you because just a few months ago even, that was not the case. And of course the gas-led recovery, I think we've all gotten over that past government. But the story is changing. It is all about scale and speed and fair, planned, orderly transition.
I admire your optimism around the fact that everybody's got past the last 10 years, but I think we should definitely look
Just
forward.
the first step, you could try and take the successes when they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's interesting, lots done, lots more to do, and the dividend for Australia, and just how quickly the debate is evolving in this area and some of the issues that we're seeing. But Michele, keen, before we get into the specifics, also keen to hear your thoughts and reflections on the Minister's comments this morning and I guess where you see things right now and today in terms of where we're at with the debate.
Thanks, Emma, and I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. Pay all my respects to the elders past and present, and always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I haven't got over the last 10 years. But we're working on it. Look, for listening to Chris Bowen this morning and thinking about, you know, what the government is saying is their ambition, what it strikes me is that it's really important that we both deal with the urgency of the fact that we've been a laggard for 10 years, if not longer, and how much we need to do and how quickly we need to act, but also that we keep our eye on what we want it to look like, not just the sort of catch-up elements of it. So when I think about that and think about vision, what's really important from the union movement's perspective is that we think about the creation of good, quality, secure, reliable, well-paid, unionised jobs of the future. So when we know that there's this enormous potential in terms of creating renewable energy jobs, but if those jobs are going to be fair jobs, then we first have to think about where they are, who they're going to be accessible to, which is why the involvement of First Nations communities in the design of this is so critical, but also making sure that we're not doing this to create lower quality jobs that people aren't going to be able to rely on. So if you're going to bring people with you, if you're going to bring the workers, communities, families that are currently working in fossil fuel industries with you on this path, then we have to make sure that we're creating really good quality jobs that you can rely on. So that vision has to be clear and that they're in the communities that are going to need them. So planning properly, making sure that workers' voice, this is part of our vision, that workers' voices are at the table in that plan. Well, this is not something that can be done to people. This is something that workers need to be part of and their unions need to be part of the design of as well. The other thing that's part of the vision is we want to get renewable energy that's abundant and affordable for everyone. So we want to have that impact in terms of cost of living, like thinking about how this is not just critically important for our climate, it's also important in terms of delivering fairer and more affordable energy. You know the cost of living crisis and the energy costs that are impacting, literally people are trying to decide between whether they turn their heater on or feed their family at the moment in many places. So that is another key element of it. And I would say that I think we've got both the potential to export our energy, good, clean, renewable energy, and that we do have a global role to play to make sure that that's fairly accessible to the world. And I want to see the jobs that come out of that, but really importantly, the jobs in the manufacturing and supply chain and value adding here. We've already failed so often in that with our current forms of mining and energy, where we export without doing the hard work and the good work we could do here to really create the maximum number of good quality jobs in Australia.
Yeah, great, Michele. And Dermot, so round to you at the end. You've had a chance to hear everybody else as well. Keen to hear your thoughts and comments on the Minister's reflections this morning.
Thank you, Emma. Hi everybody. Also pay my respects to elders both past, present, emerging, and acknowledge the lands on which we are on today. It's hard to go at the end of that because I'm agreeing with everybody. But I think if I reflect on what the Minister talked about, the first thing is he set out a frame. Australia wants to be a renewable energy superpower, yeah? That's a dominant frame that we need to understand how to deliver that, but it needs to beat some frames of the last decade that we've had forced down our throats, which, as the Minister said, are clearly not true. And so I think that how we build out the frame of what a renewable energy superpower looks like in detail, super important. So Indigenous knowledge at the centre of that, communities at the centre of that. Our region, how we work with our region, it's not just all about us as a superpower, it's about our relationship with our region, really important. So that I think is the first point. The second point, he talked a lot about together, and I think there are two things in together that this room is a great example of. First one on together is we have in this room, and we've had through this report, Sunshine Report, we've got business, the finance sector, we've got NGOs, we've got the trade unions, we've worked with government, both state and federal on this. I think that this is a once in a century opportunity for Australia, and it requires the whole country to lean into that. But the other part that I want to sort of acknowledge is we're standing on the shoulders of giants, on people who have worked in the climate sector for 30 years, yeah, who have done a lot of the hard and ugly yards. We're standing on the shoulders of our Indigenous communities across the country for millennia, and I think we need to make that a central part and acknowledge how important that is. So then goes to my last point, which is as we look over the next decade, and the Minister, I think he's going to run the 80, 88, 87, 86, 85 probably for the next few years. How we execute this is going to be super important, and I think there's a degree of discipline that we're going to require to do this because it affects every single part of our economy. It affects our relationship with the world, and so the mindset that we have as a nation is super important in doing that. And so I'm a big believer that we're living through the fourth industrial revolution. I don't like the concept of industrial revolution. I think it's a linear economy thing, which has put workers and the environment and Indigenous knowledge as just a tool to produce industry, you know, in a very linear way. We're talking about productivity. Productivity is a lot more than just input, output. And so I think that how we think about our society is a more regenerative revolution that we're going to go through is a super part.
Yeah, it's interesting actually reflecting on all of your comments. It really feels very refreshing to be moving from a should we act conversation to a how are we going to get this done and how quickly can we move and how do we do it in a different way. And that is a whole new conversation for Australia. Not every country. Many countries have been having this conversation for a while, but it really feels like we're sort of moving into an exciting new phase in this debate as well. Before moving on, I just want to dive into a couple of things that a few people have said. Interestingly, that whole of economy point and whole of community point as well. How are we going to get this done? And I just want to come back to the Jobs and Skills Summit actually for a second, given it was so topical. Kelly, you mentioned it was woven into so many conversations. Michele, you mentioned it came up in terms of the kind of transition that we're likely to see. I wonder if I could just ask you both just to reflect as well in terms of where are we in terms of our skills and capabilities and what do we need to do to really continue that hardwiring conversation and also to really make sure that we are skilling up for the opportunity of a century?
Thanks, Emma. A couple of things. One is we've had one of the other impacts of the last decade of a conservative government is we've had our higher education and vocational education system, in particular TAFE, trashed. So to be able to meet the challenges of what's necessary in terms of the skills of the future, and the skills of today, to be honest, and the skills of the future, we have to have serious investment in rebuilding our public education system. And I think both TAFE and universities are critical to that, and making sure that they're in the regions that they need to be, and that they're working again with workers and businesses and government to see, well, you know, too often in the past we've just trained people because we've taken advantage of people being prepared to pay for anything or get any type of training without there being a real job at the end of it. So we've got to get that right. The other element that struck me from the summit is we had a lot of discussion about migration and skill shortages and labour shortages and where migration fitted with that. What we know about renewable energy jobs is that if we are going to make sure that we take advantage of providing the opportunities for local people who are here now to get that work, then we've got to not just go for the easiest solution. And every country in the world is trying to find experts and those most highly skilled people in terms of renewable energy. We're not the only ones. So if we just think the answer is always going to be we're going to find someone from another country in the world to bring into this country to work on this, then we are missing the most massive opportunity, and we'll be not at that top of the list in terms of people in other countries that are wanting to get those people with those skills and experience as well. So we've got to invest in developing our own capacity and capability and building that expertise here. There's an important role for skilled migration to assist with that, but it is not the short, medium or long-term answer. It's got to be complementary to providing that skills and training for people here. The last thing I'd add to that coming out of the summit was recognising that we've got to design this away, again, goes back to those messages about collaboration, that it can't be just a sort of top-down notion of what's needed. Got to really engage with communities, unions, businesses, governments at every level to make sure that we understand this and match up the skills that are missing, the skills that are needed, and the skills that we're going to need into the future, and not just rely on a business notion, to be frank, of businesses only saying these are the skills we need, because that is too short-term or narrow a vision. We've got to think about what are the skills we need for our country, and they may not always just be driven by dollars. You know, there's skills that we will need in terms of mitigation, in terms of safety, adaptation, survival, that are not dollar-driven always. You know, they're driven by what we need as a society and the community.
I agree with everything there. The only thing that Michele and I have talked about that I would add is at the summit there was a lot of the people you would expect, people like Michele and myself and John Grimes and others, and CEOs of big organisations. But there are also people that had a disability, that was speaking up for the people in Australia that have disabilities that want to work and can contribute an enormous amount to the skills that we need. Young people were there speaking up for themselves, First Nations, people with difficult experiences in life, workers. So I agree with migration alone, which seems to be the conversation, is not the only way, and also has to be done with sustainability in mind, because of the same week we were talking about migration, we were talking about Western Sydney land being destroyed for housing. That's the last remaining koala habitat. You just have to do this properly and carefully and protect nature, because you can't get to net zero without getting to nature positive. So I think that there's Dermot's point of being able to be regenerative, like thinking about this in a way that's regenerative for people who are currently excluded. And there were lots of panels about that were focused on inclusion at the summit. And I'll just finish by saying that the panels at the summit were all cross-sectorial. except for this conversation about renewable powered Australia exports and energy, which was interesting. It shows you, I think, how central this is to everything else in the country. I mean, obviously energy powers everything and every transition. And we have got a lot of work to do to get to the type of scale that we need to be a positive contributor to climate change.
I mean, the requirements are huge. I mean, Dermot, did you want to add to that? I can see you raising the microphone.
Yeah, look, I might just add two things because I agree very much with what Michele and Kelly have said. In a global context, 100% agree, looking and saying, oh, we'll bring those skilled people, the wrong one, because everybody else is doing that in every country around the world, yeah? I think we underestimate the skills that we have here because I want to break this down a couple of things. So consulting businesses, financial sector, legal sector, the jobs in this is so broad, and you see all the consulting firms are all restructuring around providing services. You can see the whole financial sector doing that. So I'm not sure we need to do too much to help them because they're going to do this anyway. So it goes to then, particularly in regions, how do we make that transition? Because that's going to be harder. So this becomes very geographical focus. So renewable energy precincts, things that really make a difference on the ground, building infrastructure, yeah, in Queensland, really important to show how it's done. So I think that piece and then matching the skills to that is going to be really important. But the jobs cover every sector in society, and if you look globally, we're very well positioned, and there's trillions of dollars sitting there looking around the world, and there are not, as I think the Minister was saying, there are not many better places in the world where you have all the energy base, a whole suite of great skills, and the ability to put capital with speed and scale. But we've got to start yesterday. We've got to really make this happen in the next few years. We haven't got a decade to do this.
Yeah.
And I just add to that.
I was just about to go to you, Clark. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this question.
Because I do think it's not about a revolution; it's about evolution. I think that calibration is the key at the moment. In spite of your view of the last 10 years, we have some amazing talent in Australia in the renewable energy sector. I mean, the first time around, we effectively sent our capability to China and helped them kickstart the photovoltaic industry rather than developing it ourselves. But we've still got all that capability. There are two really interesting electrolyser technologies in the world, and one of them's in Wollongong. So there's a lot in the science and development community that is really worth supporting, and it will develop itself. On the services side, just as a side point, we're really privileged that our mining services partner in Townsville is an Indigenous-owned business. We didn't choose them for that reason. We chose them because they're really good at it. But they have fantastic experience in that part of the world and across the Northern Territory. We're one of the most efficient mining technology countries in the world. All the people who currently work in fossil industries and other minerals extraction have skills that are immensely transferable to other value-added manufacturing roles. The idea that you work at your Lawn power station and then you go and work in a gigawatt battery plant seems far-fetched. But the skills are electricians and fitters and turners and engineers, that they are actually more transferable than I think we sometimes think.
Karrina, let me ask you this question as well, because it certainly seems like Australians are working in every renewable energy industry overseas as well. But it feels like this is an opportunity, if we get this right, to actually be more inclusive, to bring in new opportunities across different communities as well. I mean, is that kind of what you're seeing in terms of the skills opportunities, the career opportunities, the community development opportunities for First Nations as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say this is one of the reasons why we've established the network, because actually we haven't been part of the discussions really, and we know where roughly the good kind of solar potential is, and we know where some of these large-scale projects are going, but actually there's been really limited engagement with traditional owners and communities about what those jobs look like and what the kind of, 3, 4, 5 year skill development plan is for people to genuinely engage. So we've been working with the ACTU and MUA in a couple of those large-scale sites to actually do a skills audit, give that to the company, because actually what they're planning at the moment for most of those projects is FIFO workers from the East Coast. They're looking at building kind of camps, on country, rather than actually engaging with kind of local community to build a workforce where it needs to be, which is also, if we're talking about a skills shortage, you need to have people employed where they live on those projects. So I think there's a lot to do on the front. I think that would be the same for some of the transmission work, but there's hardly any kind of First Nations owned businesses in this sector yet. And if we look to Canadians, they've got 200 to 300 First Nations owned and run kind of businesses. They've generated 1.5 billion in kind of revenue. I think we're just really behind, but I think it's possible, but we need to do a lot of work and kind of future planning.
I think that also the different type of energy system that we'll have, so like more decentralised, more distributed and more regional based. Well, do you agree with that kind of picture that I'm painting? But also, do you think that creates opportunities for different types of businesses to be involved and different types of community ownership structures to be involved in energy generation and distribution?
Yeah, and actually the community ownership models, they're actually really complicated. So even working out how you get solar on a publicly owned house, which is also, there's some racial issues going on there in terms of our mob and publicly owned houses and whether they're actually fit for kind of a changing climate and heating up climate. So there's work to do there around that, which is a lot of policy reform. It's not a technical problem. It's actually literally about kind of working with the retailer and the government. But I think there's no one size fits all. And so the energy system for our remote communities has been incredibly inadequate, but we're kind of looking to this as an opportunity to reform how it's done at kind of outstation level, remote community, urban, and then also making sure that we're part of that kind of broader jobs plan.
Yeah, great. Okay, I want to take it down a level in terms of the specifics that are underpinning. Well, I say take it down a level, but actually we are talking about every industry sector, whole of economy transformation. So when I say take it down a level, I mean a small level. But and come back to the Sunshot report that was produced that actually did kind of do the work in mapping out where those 6 key opportunities are. So just for everybody else's sake, who, of course, I'm sure you've all read the report and have it memorised, but just in case, those 6 key areas really being exporting renewable hydrogen and ammonia, processing and exports for renewable powered metals like green steel and aluminium, exporting critical minerals for clean technologies, manufacturing and exporting batteries made in Australia, exporting our clean energy education and training services, and also providing clean energy services. So these 6 areas, there's a lot to unpack in each of these different areas. But I guess I'm keen to hear from this group how this will flow through to the broader transformational and economic opportunities for Australia and for the community as well. Maybe I'll start with you, Clark, because you're in the weeds of a lot of these opportunities as well, and actually, growing a business in this area as well. Like, how do you see this developing and benefiting Australia in many ways? A bit of a Dorothy Dixon question there.
The starting point is, I sound a bit mono-focused on value-added use of energy, but the more value we can embed in the process, the higher cost of electricity or hydrogen we can bear in that supply chain. And I think that will support driving change significantly. So my view is that there are tremendous opportunities across all energy intensive industry to develop exports for Australia. We need to prioritise on the ones with the most value add because they can be economically viable first. The fundamental point is we need to be competitive with the rest of the world, and the rest of the world has a whole lot of different ways of approaching this challenge. In Canada, for example, they have an immense amount of hydro that luckily for business, including Australian businesses, the government invested in heavily over many decades, and so they have very low electricity costs. That's underpinning their development of new green energy industries. The other side of the value-added component is that there are a huge number of jobs in manufacturing, as opposed to the renewable energy infrastructure development involves a massive number of jobs in construction and deployment, but very little ongoing jobs. And that's a good thing from a point of view of delivering low ongoing operating costs. But it can be very difficult for communities who have supported solar farms or wind farms to find that the net job benefit isn't there after the first 3 or 4 or 5 years. So I think focusing at an industry level on these value-added components is really going to drive communities. And if I think of Townsville as an example, there are a number of minerals processing businesses in Townsville today, and as a result of that, the infrastructure is already there. Great port infrastructure, great training, great electricity connection into town. It's a really good platform to develop on. And I think all the industrial communities in regional Australia have a similar set of advantages. But we really need to, and I think to Dermot's point about renewable energy industrial precincts, getting that coordinated, coordinating the planning and making it easier for projects to get through the stages is really going to drive value in those communities.
Kelly, let me ask you this. I mean, for so much of the Australian climate change debate, we've been looking at energy and carbon-intensive industries as being the biggest risk and part of the problem. But if we decarbonise the electricity supply, do some of these same industries become part of the solution in terms of ability to actually completely remodel themselves to position for a globally decarbonising world? And how does that work in terms of some of those key areas that have been identified?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's one of the things I've disliked most about my job and when we're speaking up about climate change. And actually I was just telling a story on the way here about 2016, the day after Trump was elected, so I had a hangover. But we were at a union just transition morning, and I was speaking to a lot of people working in the coal sector about how we need to move away from coal and and that's advocating for their lives to change. And I explained why I advocate for that, because of how dangerous climate change is to all the people that we love, their loved ones as well as mine, and all the natural world that we love. So I wish that the discussion that we had in this country around coal and gas being damaging for climate hasn't been taken as the people who are working in those regions or have those jobs, are bad, because they're not, and that's never has been the intention. But I do think that's how it's either been spun or taken. Not on that morning though, I've got to say. Actually that morning we had a wonderful speaker who worked in one of the coal plants down in Hazelwood. I'm like, what's the name of that one? I ran a campaign to close Hazelwood for many years and I forgot the name of it. And he spoke about his skills and what he does every day and where he can do that in another coal plant or in a clean energy sense. And he actually ran for Parliament not so long ago in Victoria, and that was a key part of what he was talking about. So the ability for people who live in regions that have provided our energy to provide the world's energy and the world's renewable resources is vast, and we need to respect that. And it does, as Dermot says, come down to that region. After the 2019 election, ACF decided to do a lot of work in central Queensland because we were really sick of those communities and workers being used, I think, by politics and politicians to say that your jobs are going to be there forever, and that's certainly not going to be the case. And I think one of the great benefits of this transition is jobs that last. But the thing I think about, and we're up in Gladstone, for example, is, and you talk to people, they say, do you know what, I want to live in this town that I love. I want my kids to go and play netball and footy on the weekend. I want to be able to pay my mortgage off. And I don't mind so much if I export electrons from a different source or renewable powered aluminium. They want to have good lives in their areas. And I think that we often don't talk about enough what stays the same. and that can be quite disruptive. So I think that we need to have these transition conversations actually both at the national and local level, and that workers and communities need to be at the heart of that, just as with First Nations, as Chris said this morning, what do you want, Karrina? Because it should be coming from you, and I feel it's the same in those communities.
Dermot, let me jump to you here. We talk a lot about what we're transitioning from. Do we talk enough about what we are transitioning to?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I think we're living in a very, we talk about disruptive times, we talk about uncertainty, we talk about the various changes that are happening in the world. It's hard to look at a number of transitions, disruptions, revolutions, whatever you want to call them, that are underway. So we're talking about energy, but you've got to add then a tech revolution going on top of this. Then you've got to add a finance one, which is underway. So there's a suite of different revolutions that are not traveling along in parallel and they all interside. And so in big transitions, it's the combination of a suite of things that really make a sort of seismic shift. And so I think that in Australia, we're in a really good place that we talked about, because we have our sovereignty is strong, we're able to bring capital to this country, we've got skills, we've got to reinvest into that future piece. But I do think back to what the Minister said, if we are rallying around, we're going to be a renewable energy superpower, then it's what we've been talking about. How do we do that? How do we stop looking to the past, learn from it, but then develop out the plan that we're going to think? And so I think there's a number of elements. Those 6 things are important. I'd love to see us have a national export strategy for renewable energy. Yeah, the industry ministry, the Minister for Industry, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister for Energy and Climate, rally government and industry round, because that's going to bring the capital that's going to help build advanced manufacturing in this country. And those 6 elements, it's going to bring the money that's going to help do the repowering Indigenous communities and put you at the centre of those decision making and provide the resources. So I think that's really important. But I still think there's a trauma that all of us in this room and probably online have lived through in the last 15 years. And I think we've just got to put that behind us and really say we've learned from that, but this is where we want to go collectively.
I mean, having a deliberative strategy around any aspect of climate change would be an exciting development. But where you really begin to see these kinds of longer term, although we've only got 87 months, longer term transformations is where we have a plan. So I mean, what you mentioned, a renewable energy export strategy, like what sort of things would you be looking for in that? Would you be looking for industry development, trade discussions, like maybe flesh that out a little bit for us here?
Yeah, look, there are a number of examples over the last couple of decades where we've done this, and so we've got a whole infrastructure that is very good at going out to Japan and New York and London and Tokyo and Beijing and selling what Australia can do to the world. Unfortunately, it's been very previously focused on coal and gas. Maybe, can I tell the quick story?
Yeah.
So last month, I'll do this super quick. Last month, the Japan ambassador to Australia went to speak at, I think, UQ in Brisbane, and he said 3 things, which I think is really important. First of all, he's annoyed the Queensland government has increased the rent tax on fossil fuels, which as a country we should be doing because they are making so much money. The second part, he said, I want as much green hydrogen and advanced manufacturing that you can provide. And so I think it's a good example, as Chris talked about, bilaterals going around the world. Everybody wants to work with us, and we're in a really strong position where they're paying a lot of money for our oil and gas. We need to take that money back, and we need to put it to drive this revolution at as fast as speed and scale.
Michele, we were talking earlier about the many happy hours you spend on terrible times of the day on international discussions as well with other labour organisations. I mean, this must surely be something that you're seeing in so many different countries and jurisdictions. I guess I'm keen to hear from you if there are insights you can provide around how maybe other markets, other countries are dealing with the development of new industries, what we're transitioning to from a labour force perspective as well.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. The first thing I'd say is there's a critical piece of the puzzle missing. It's one of the recommendations of the Sunshot Report, which is the need for a national energy transition authority. So we need to have a plan that properly thinks about how we both make sure that we are caring for the workers and families and communities that are affected by the changes that we know are urgently needed and are already happening, and we also need to make sure that we're engaging the representatives of those workers and as well as others in designing the diversification of those economies and what sort of jobs they're going to be. And let me tell you that we've closed 11 coal-fired power stations in just over a decade. The average notice time that those workers got of those closures was 4 months. So that's disgraceful. Like, that is a complete abandonment of those workers and their families and communities. And if we're going to get it right, then we need to have much better lead times and do the planning, because nobody's going to believe the sort of wing and a prayer. Like, don't worry, there'll be a job for you. Nobody's, as I said, when the minister was here, you need tangible jobs being created now that people can see and touch and see the quality of, and then you need to build the bridge from the current job. And you're right, so many of the skills are completely transferable, but you need to really build that bridge. I mean, I think back, part of my history is working in the textile, clothing and footwear industry and representing those workers for a very long time, and I saw the impact of an industry being abandoned and what that meant in terms of people's lives. Really skilled, hardworking people who'd made an enormous contribution who were just left on the scrap heap, to be honest, because there wasn't enough genuine understanding of how those skills could be utilised in other places and enough support to get people there. So I think having a national energy transition authority, you look at Germany is a good example of that, talking about your global question, Emma. You look around the world where there's been, there's always more and better we can do, but where we can learn from. And I think that model of involving industry and government and unions and local communities in a transition authority, there's really good examples we can learn from in Germany and other countries, and we need to fill that space and get that established in Australia quickly. We're staring down the face of the next closures in 18 months' time, and it could well come earlier for coal-fired power stations. We can't let anyone else only have 4 months' notice of their life changing like that.
And just on that point, Emma, it's not just the fairness to workers. The advantage of longer notice periods is investment certainty as well. If we could, no one can shut down a power station in 4 months, right? So everyone knows how long it takes, and every power station in the country could give you a close date tomorrow if they wanted to. It's just been politically untenable to do so to date. I think that would have a huge advantage in attracting investment into transitional renewable energy, as well as providing that certainty you talk about for workers.
Yeah, and I completely agree, Clark. And the point about having an authority is that it's about looking at how you bring those investments into those communities and making sure that you're doing it in advance, so not afterwards, that you don't leave that hole for people to fall into. And so having that plan in a way where you are attracting investment, you're making sure that the people who are making a huge profit at the moment are also contributing financially to the change, as well as public money. Like my view is that that we should have a super profits tax happening right now to assist with this. But I think that having the plan gives us the opportunity to get the right people doing the hard work before you have the hard reality of a closure hit.
Karrina, I want to bring you in at this point because having a plan, getting better coordinated, clearly identified as a key part of making this transition fast but equitable. But also it feels like getting different voices and more voices at the table in planning what that transition actually looks like is important. I thought you were very polite earlier on in resisting the temptation when the Minister said, tell me what you need. I thought I could see on your face you're thinking, well, settle back, I've got an hour in terms of how I could answer that question. But you did hold back a little bit, so I do want to draw you out now in terms of where you think some of those insights are, where you think some of those really key opportunities are for regional and First Nations communities in co-designing a better transition as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to consider is the context this transition's occurring in terms of some of the cultural heritage impacts and I would say destruction. If we look back only a couple of years to what happened to Juukan Gorge, that's the context in which our community have been negotiating, dealing with, managing, pushing back on mining on our country. So we are hoping, and I think we're trying not to be too, optimistic really in some ways, because the legacy of how mining's been done in this country is terrible. It's divided our communities. It's still very much going on. And we want to try and work with industry and government to say, what if we reset that relationship and what if we actually came at this industry approaching it differently. But that means that requires work at all levels. So we've been working, with the Smart Energy Council, the Clean Energy Council. We've designed these best practice principles, which basically have at the heart of it consent, and then all of the other things that come with that, making sure that communities are not presented with a project when it's already done, proposed on country that people might not want it on, but actually we're part of literally designing where projects go. We know an example of one of the large-scale projects that actually got moved because traditional owners, of course, had knowledge of that area where the floods were that wasn't on any map, and so they moved the project, and people are working to make sure that, it's in the right country. But I think those principles should be applied regardless of the native title rights and tenure of our mob. It needs to be something that's easy for industry to do, but that's actually genuinely in partnership. So we're working on that. But I think, we have a long way to go for us to trust that actually this industry could and should be done differently. So I think that's the thing that's going to take quite a bit of work.
I'm going to ask a cheeky, selfish question here. A lot of the work that I do is with the finance sector and the investment community, who've been pretty active the last few years in terms of pushing companies to do better in facilitating the transition. They're also pretty good at talking directly to companies around expectation setting. So if you were sitting across the room with the biggest funds in the country, maybe Hester, for example, what advice would you give them in terms of what they should be looking for from companies in having a really strong and effective plan for a more equitable, integrated transition as well?
It's interesting you say that. So we have been talking to some of the finance, and super funds, etc. And we've been talking to ARENA and the CEFC. And one of the things that the Canadians did really early on is they worked with government industry and they got government to make industry apply these, set of principles, which is a little different to what we're doing, but they only funded businesses that were doing the right thing. And so if we talk to kind of financiers and say, here's the 10 things you must do, and you only kind of give money to companies and, support investments that are doing those things, I think that will go a long way. Yeah.
And particularly government agencies, I would have thought this would be a key area. I mean, the Minister also mentioned the role that government and public agencies will play in their own net zero to 2050 planning, or hopefully earlier. Also some advice there in terms of what they should be doing in the planning as well, similar sorts of principles.
I mean, this is the thing where it's like everything's moving so fast but so slow. You try and change literally the ARENA funding guidelines. And they're like, that could take a year or two. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I think working out where the pressure points are, which things are really important to do kind of in what order. And I think, the Transition Authority should be playing a role in kind of overseeing that, because it does feel like there are some things that are happening that we're not across, and then there are things that are, that we need to be part of. The offshore wind process, what's going on around our native title rights around that, making sure that our traditional owners are skilled up, ready to negotiate, ready to kind of even be the proponents on those companies. Like, there's a lot to think about.
Clark as well, keen to hear your thoughts around how do we co-design for or bring in different voices in the table on the transition over the next few years as well, to keep it efficient, keep it moving fast as well.
Yeah, well, I think to me the beginning of the step is we need world-class energy prices And you know, when the minister talks about best solar in the world and very good wind, and it might be above average across the country, but in the places where we want to put wind, it's really good. That's the first step to delivering really low-cost electricity. But there are a lot of other steps that need to be implemented along the way, like transmission, the 10,000 kilometres, like putting the generation in the right place and trying to put the use of that generation as close as possible to where the generation is and make it efficient. And I think that's the opportunity for regional Australia to really come out of this on top. There are a lot of, as I said before, a lot of existing infrastructure, but the whole community needs to be engaged in that process. I've found it fantastic when you go to Gladstone or Townsville or the Hunter, how many organisations, including these organisations, are actively bringing the communities together. But it feels a bit like a lot of good intent without a lot of coordination. And I guess that's because there hasn't been an overarching perspective to date. Maybe the transition authority is what can do that. But if it can be applied at that local level, I think that's a really strong driver. The other side of it is, you know, we look to export. The offtake for steel, for example, it's hugely favourable for Australia. Japan, Korea, Europe, the US, they're all looking for our product. To date, they haven't been sure that we're ready to deliver it, but bringing them into the discussion and getting them involved. A lot of the companies that will buy our product in the long term are already invested in Australia in other things, often fossil fuel and mining projects, but they have decarbonisation targets. They have teams looking around the world at where the best opportunities are. We need to be attractive to them for that.
Yeah, it's interesting, already beginning to see this flow through to a lot of those bilateral discussions. I mean, even things like the discussions underway at the moment around the green trade agreement with Singapore. And again, from a professional financial services perspective, that's going to be really interesting in terms of how it impacts investment and trade flows to facilitate not just Australia's but regional-wide transformation as well. I just want to round out that last question though around other voices at the table, because the voice that we often tend to forget is the voice of nature. And Kelly and Dermot, I know both of your organisations are scaling up and this week have put out quite a lot of new research around biodiversity and nature positive and nature impacts as well. How do we bring the environment back into the conversation around climate decarbonisation as well? And where do you see some of those synergies between the whole body of work that's coming through on biodiversity and nature and climate as well? Maybe Dermot, maybe start with you.
Okay, thanks.
It seems a very panda-loaded question.
No, it's a really important question. Today is Threatened Species Day in Australia. We have a whole lot of very unique wildlife, and I think not many of us really know that we have the highest mammal extinction rate in the world. So, but again, I think that we need to be positive about, okay, we can make a difference, because if we stick in it's all going bad, I think it doesn't provide a vision of where we need to go. And so I talked a little bit about that sort of regenerative revolution, and that nature needs to be part of that. We need to build out nature positive solutions as we build out the renewable energy infrastructure, we think. So the idea of a circular economy, which a lot of us have probably bounced around for the last 10 or 20 years, I think that time has come. So if we're going to build out trillions of dollars of infrastructure over the next 2 decades, we want to build it in a way that is more circular, so that we are able to design it in a way that can be recycled, reused, repurposed at the end of that. So thinking about that, and then nature becomes a really critical part of that, because in fact, as Indigenous cultures continues to teach us, you know, without having nature there, without having the land healthy, breathing, providing us everything, then we can be a renewable energy superpower. But what's the state of our country when we do that? So I think that making nature positive a key part of this whole sort of superpower is going to be a critical part of it, and doing that really closely following Indigenous knowledge as we go down that road.
Yeah, as I said earlier, you can't get to net zero without getting to nature positive. And nature is a climate solution, but it's pretty important in its own right because it provides, you know, everything we need for life. In 2022, the world is negotiating a global agreement for nature, like the Paris Agreement for climate. And we all know the Paris Agreement is flawed and imperfect, but it provides a framework in which the world operates to drive down emissions to zero. And we just need to drive down faster, that's all. We need the same in nature because we don't have a global agreement. And if we did, we can have a nature positive Australia, a nature positive Woolworths, you know, a nature positive climate plan. And so nature positive essentially means you just have more natural habitat in 2030 than you had in 2020. My staff say we shouldn't use it because no one understands it. I'm like, it's pretty straightforward. Let's use it and help people understand it. So we do need that global agreement and then bring that back to Australia. And then the other thing we need to do is to make sure that all of the development that we need to do for renewables is done with consent and with engagement and involvement and empowerment of First Nations and regional communities, rural communities and nature. So we need national environment protection laws that actually work. That's not just a process that you can drive a mining or a logging truck through, as I say. There's a lot of loopholes in the current laws. So that reform has been committed by the current government, and there's enormous amount of work by the Nature Alliance in Australia, called Places You Love, on what that should look like. But we know that we do need mining as part of the clean export renewable superpower. So it's just we're going to be mining different things. So we need that mining to be done well and sustainably so it's not harming nature, and we need to build power lines. We need a whole lot of things happening. And there just needs to be a framework in Australia to make sure that that happens sustainably. So we're working on that as well.
Yes, we can definitely walk and chew gum at the same time on this issue. I do hope, though, I mean, given that we're coming up to COP27, the 27 years of meeting on climate change, we're coming up to COP15 on biodiversity, that it doesn't take us up to 27 to get an agreement on biodiversity. But I think we have learned a lot of lessons from climate change as well in that regard. I guess I want to round out, I guess, in just the final part of the session, just to kind of ask for rapid fire responses here. We'll see how we go. I want to ask you, one, what you see as one of the biggest challenges over the next 87 months in terms of accelerating the decarbonisation journey in achieving a renewable energy superpower status, but more importantly, how we're going to overcome it, or what is one key initiative that will help us overcome it from your perspective. So maybe I'll just run straight down the panel. Actually, I'll start with you, Clark. Maybe I'll start with you.
Cheap electricity is the biggest challenge, and transmission is a big part of the answer. We need to get the cheapest possible solar from the best places to where industry and where people are. So the Minister talks about 87 months and 10,000 kilometres of transmission. It sounds like a lot of work in a short period of time, and we need the transmission running now, not in 2030.
And what's your key recommendation on how we're going to get that transmission deployed? What do we do to get it out there?
I think it's an immense coordination challenge. We've got too many vested interests in different areas at the moment. So the government has a real role in coordinating that and having a strategy and ensuring that that the transmission is done in a planned and coordinated way. I think we should be looking at outside capital in that as well, and thinking about different financing methods, and thinking of different ways about how to pay for the cost of that over a long period of time.
Great. Karrina, biggest challenge and how we're going to fix it?
I think we really need to bring people with us. And, you know, if we're talking about doing the kind of transmission fast, we can't do it if people haven't given consent to that kind of large-scale development on country. So we really need to get people kind of on board. And we also need to accept that some projects aren't going to be consented to. So we're going to have to either move them or work out another way around that. So I think you know, that's just a reality. We're seeing that happen in large-scale wind farms in Queensland already, where they just shouldn't be put there. You know, in WA, there's, you know, Twiggy Forest has got multiple large-scale hydrogen projects planned that shouldn't go on that particular country. And so making sure our traditional owners are in the position to actually push back and say, we don't want it here, we want it here. And I just want to do a shout-out. So Auntie Polly has written this report. It's on the Wilderness Society website, but just talking about kind of cultural values, protecting country, protecting sacred sites and protecting nature. That mob is still in a really big fight, as are many others around the country. So just if people want to check that out too.
Great, and we love a good prop. Kelly, biggest challenge, potential solution?
I'm hoping someone else is going to mention money and investment, because I want to mention...
I'm happy to mention that, Kelly.
Great, great. Because I want to mention mindset. We've just had 10 years of trying to get anything happening. And we, the people who are going to actually, not just in this room, but everyone who's going to create this change, now has to go really far and really fast. You know, the African proverb that says, go fast, go alone, go far, go together. We have to do both those things. I think that's very challenging. So I think the solutions are to have that national strategy, so it gives us some certainty, to have the frameworks that we're talking about, like the climate bill, which hopefully will be the climate law, which is highly imperfect, but it is at least a framework that we can use to build on really fast. So the challenge, I think, for a lot of us who have been advocating for this for a long time is to not let the perfect get in the way in the good, and that is incredibly hard to do. It wasn't easy to stand at the 43% signing that I went to, because it's nowhere near enough, but we need it, and then we build on it. And so that's a challenge to all of us in our mindset, to switch to be really fast. And I think to have these amazing collaborations of the Sunshot Report, that's how we're going to change the world, when unions and businesses and environmentalists and First Nations and people across Australia are all asking for the same thing. And on climate we are now, apart from a small percentage. That's where the power is.
Great. Michele, keen to hear your thoughts. Biggest challenge, solution?
Biggest challenge is to make sure that in this transformation we create safe, secure, well-paid jobs for the future, because there's a danger that we could create a whole lot of jobs that are unsafe, badly paid, exploited workers on visas, to be frank, and we've already seen that. So shifting from that to really making sure that this is a contribution to the long-term sort of society and economy we want to have, where people have got jobs they can rely on, and that they add really in every way to the quality of our life. And the solution, I think I've said, I think to make that happen, it's just not going to happen by people sort of hoping it happens. So having a National Energy Transition Authority that drives that all the way down and engages people all the way up is critical to it.
Great, thank you. And Dermot?
So all of that, I think, is 100% agree. So I'm just trying to think of what else to with it. In this transformation, transition, however we want to describe it, there are winners and losers, yeah? And I think it's important we need to talk about that. The Renewable Energy Superpower Frame is mostly about winners and how we go through that transition. I think one of the risks is we underestimate how the existing energy providers will behave. They are not going to behave nicely like, thank you so much for this new future. Some of them will make the transition, some of them will resist it enormously. And I think underestimating that resistance, I think, is going to be is a real problem. But to the flip side is helping them change the mindset, realise the opportunity, do it in a way that's different, and bring business along on that journey is perhaps the opportunity there. I'd like to finish with one thing here, which is, having thought about for the last, year, whether Australia should have a climate COP, I actually think we should, as a country, say, you know what, here's one thing, whether it's 29 or whether it's 30 or whether it's 31, I'm not sure it matters. I think we should say, we want to have the climate COP here. We're going to rally the nation around that vision over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years and deliver this because I think the discipline that will help us would be enormous.
Great. I think that's a pretty great set of solutions, actually, in terms of get the transmission out the door, make sure we've got the consent of communities, change our mindset, make sure that workers are actually included in the transition with the right conditions, don't underestimate the resistance, but also just to pull that together a little bit in terms of going further together, maybe using COP as the vehicle in which we actually achieve that accelerated change. So we've got just a couple of minutes left, so I am going to take the opportunity to ask a couple of questions that have come through online so that we're not an entirely in-person event, so that we do reflect the time that we're in. And actually, it relates very much to this question around don't underestimate the resistance, because one of the questions that's come through is very much around the social licence required, which I think maybe goes to your point, Karrina, particularly in terms of solar farms and wind farms, and how that they're impacting in regional communities as well. I mean, do you have a sense of how building that coalition of support for development in communities, do you think that we're ignoring the social licence question? Do you think we could be doing more to lean into it in terms of the comments you were making around how do we really get consent going?
I mean, I can only speak to the kind of places that we're working with, and the network is growing nationally, and, you know, so we're bringing more people on board. But I think it's people understanding what the footprint is, what does it look like, how big, you know, cultural impacts, where's the site, all that sort of stuff. But also what I'm hearing from our communities is what are the potential benefits? People just have really no concept of, you know, and again, that goes to our experience of, you know, let's give you a Range Rover and some bunting at the fete and, you know, a sponsored t-shirt at the footy. Like, that's the kind of experience of large-scale mining. So actually, what are the job opportunities? What are the other kind of financial arrangements that could be in place? So I think there's actually a lot of explaining about the possibility to do as well. Yeah.
Dermot, you mentioned don't underestimate resistance. Were you also did you also have in mind the actual practical challenges of generating social licence in project development?
Yeah, and that goes to the rethink about how we do this, yeah? And so it's not about continuing an industrial revolution where we just replace a whole suite of linear energy with another suite of linear energy, yeah? It's about Indigenous, it's about nature positive, it's about a circular economy type bit. That's where I think we can be different, and that's going to be attractive to the rest of the world who are looking at similar things as well.
Yeah, great. Okay. We did have one other question, but the red light is now flashing very prominently in our faces, so I might just draw it there and again just kind of make the comment that, you know, one of the key ways that we will build social support, social licence to continue to accelerate the transition is through collaborations like this. And also just want to congratulate the coalition of organisations that have produced this Unshot report, but also congratulate the Better Futures Forum for bringing all of these different perspectives together today and over the last day as well to really unpack and talk through these issues of the how, not the if, as well. So please join me in thanking the panel. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, and can I just echo that thanks to Emma for facilitating that as well, and to the whole panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a round of applause. And I don't know about you, but for me, hearing those insights about the detailed plans for Australia, about the opportunities, some of the challenges and how to overcome them, that sense about fairness, that was something that Michele spoke about right at the very start, of the fairness around jobs, about how they're co-designed, who's at the table, where they're going to be, and how we think about that, certainly ties in with that sense of opportunity that we've got. And I just want to, one of the things that jumped out at me was when Karrina was talking about just balancing that, the opportunities and the challenges, and how to turn those around so that there's mutual benefit for those that are sitting at the table that haven't been heard perhaps at every conversation in the past, and how as a society and a community we look to turn that around. So I'm really grateful for that. We heard so much there about what's already underway in regions like Gladstone, the Hunter, transforming communities into those thriving renewable energy industrial precincts, and about the opportunities that are ahead. So I don't know about you, but it left me feeling there was a great sense of optimism as well. We're going to take a break now for morning tea. For those of you that are here in the room, you'll be joining us for refreshments just outside. Keep in mind that we'll be starting right back at 11 a.m. for our next session, where you'll be hearing from UNSW's Associate Professor Feng-Shi Wu, Professor Anthony Burke, Science Professor Jane McAdam, alongside Dr. Pichimon Yiofantong, Dr. Elizabeth Bolton, Ian Cumming, and Mr. Willie Sack. dialing in from Vanuatu on approaches to managing climate change's impacts across the Asia-Pacific region. So we'll see you back very soon. Thank you.